Hi, I'm Michel Gérald Boutet. Welcome to Druid Talks. Hi, this first discussion of Druid Talks will be about Celtic astrology. Well, what do we know about Celtic astrology? Most people, what they know is what they've seen concerning the tree calendar. Of course, everybody knows that the tree calendar is pretty much what Celtic astrology should have looked like, or what probably was. But this is not the case. If you go to different sites, Wikipedia and whatnot, they'll tell you that Celtic astrology is a fabrication, is something that was invented by Robert Graves and his followers. They'll also tell you that Old Irish had an astrology that we don't know what it looked like, but there are comments about it, and that's about it. Now, then there was the Coligny calendar, which was found in France at the end of the 1800s, and much has been written about it. And of course, in Wikipedia, they'll tell you that go have a look at the tree calendar. Of course, Robert Graves, when he wrote The White Goddess and created his Celtic tree calendar, mentioned that the calendar was probably just a Roman calendar, and that it had nothing to do with the Gaelic Druids. This is what he wrote. Of course, we know that this is completely wrong, as many have indicated. The Coligny calendar was in fact a truly druidically devised calendar in the Gaulish language. And this has been studied quite a lot by many of the experts, linguists, historians, and so now it's absolutely proven that the Coligny calendar was a true Celtic calendar. In fact, one of the months, which is Samonios, is parallel to the Irish month of Samhain, and which is etymologically linked to the Gallic Samonios, which actually means the meeting, the time of sowing, or the sower, Samonios, which is, the genitive, means of the sower, time of the sower. And another interesting thing is, most of the experts disagree that there could have been somewhere a tree symbology for astrology, for Celtic astrology. It doesn't mean that the Celtic signs were tree signs. They had to have a zodiac like all of the Indo-European peoples. And of course, when we compare Indo-European cultures between themselves, we quickly find that many of the concepts and the symbology, it all goes back to the early mythology and the cosmology of the ancient Indo-Europeans, and as it was handed down into the daughter cultures, such as the Vedic culture, or the Persian, or the Greek, Roman, Germanic, Celtic, Slavic, and more. There's more to the list. So Celtic astrology had to be exactly the same, must have had the same structure as that of the other Indo-European cultures. So it couldn't be any different. I 30 years ago, I started researching this. I was in art history and studying in these things, and I discovered that some of the symbols found in rock art or in early Celtic art had astrological or astronomical implications, and many. I wasn't the first, of course, to find this out, but I mean, many of the people who had studied this were having difficulty in proving that this was exactly the case, because it's very difficult nut to crack. Celtic astrology is a very difficult nut to crack because, as Caesar said, the Druids have left a very few written records on their teachings and their philosophy. But nevertheless, epigraphy now has made much progress. And, with the Celtiberian inscriptions that are quite extant, some of the plates that were discovered in France, there are many of them, like the Larzac and Chamelière, and also now we know, thanks to Dr. Rudolf Hitz, that the Glosel tablets were, they dated back to the 2nd or 3rd century before the Common Era, and that they were written in the form of a script that was quite similar to that of the Celtiberians and the Iberians in general, the Lusitanians and the Tartessians, Turdatians, and so we now know that there are certain cosmic and astronomical considerations that were handed down by the Druids of antiquity. Now, in the discussions to come, I will not speak of neo-Druidism nor Wicca or some of these modern fads, because there isn't much to say about them, since anybody can invent or say anything that passes through their mind without having to prove these assertions. So there's nothing more to add to that. I'll really restrain myself to discussing things that are historical from antiquity and the Middle Ages and early antiquity and things like that, so I won't venture further than that. This being said, the medieval era has certain documents. We know that the Irish the monks have written extensively on the matters of astrology and things like that. They have also collected many manuscripts from different cultures with their contacts in Spain, with the Arabs, they also later on with the Romans, the Latins, and the Greeks. And so, it revolves around these things. But in today's Celtic languages, the names of the planets are not Celtic. They are borrowed from Roman. So much of the Latin vocabulary seeped into Christian Celtic culture, so it's very difficult to find some of the tested, the proven words of the vocabulary terminology that pertains to astrology and astronomy. But nevertheless, with epigraphy, with archaeology, we know, as in France, there are names that pop up, like Ries is the name of a place in Dauphiné, southern France, and this was the name of the Celtic Venus, Rhea, which was similar etymologically to Freya, the Germanic goddess, which was similar to Venus. Then there are the classical texts. Some of the names are given by some of the Greek or Roman authors, such as Nocturnus, which was a Latin version of Nocturnos, Osiros, which meant the nightly wanderer. And then finally, if one is to look into the Irish material, of course there's all of the Irish texts, which are very rich in detail on cosmology and cosmography and godly names, and which are linked to the stars, and like Starn and things like that. So if one is to look at the manuscripts themselves, there's the Book of Ballymote, and this brings us back to Robert Graves and the Ogham, the Ogham tree connection. But if you look into the Coligny calendar, you know that in the Gaelic language, the monthly names are given, with certain ascriptions qualifying them. Like, let's say, Samonios for Samhain. Samonios is, the lunar monthly name, and then to make sure that we know that it's the constellation, is added on an annotation abbreviated as Prin, P-R-I-N or N-N dot. And this is the abbreviation of Prinios, which means arborescence or outbranching. And so if a constellation is called an outbranching or something that is related to trees, Prinos means tree, and the Brittonic languages, you have the same thing with the Bren, Kolbren, the alphabet that was supposedly discovered or handed down by E4 Williams and or Morgano, and so you get to see there that there is a tree connection. That is because Prinos is the name of an astral cusp, as I found with Joseph Monard, the French Celtic scholar and linguist. The Romans use the word cuspid, and as a horn to mark the sun's entry into an astral house constellation. The Irish would have had something more in the direction of Fid, like the Forfeda, which are the overfuse of the Ogham, and the additional letters in the Ogham alphabet, and so they would have used more this term, which goes back to the old Celtic root, which is fid, feda, to widus, which means again tree, and this would have been, of course, the Gaelic or Gaelic counterpart of the Prinos. And in this way, the zodiacal scheme of cusps and things like that would have been called Prinion in Old Celtic or Gaelic. And this is what we find on the Coligny calendar. So this gives us, as Joseph Monard found, a great indication. But then looking in through the Book of Ballymote, dating back to the 1300s, which must have been a document that was recopied by the monks. Of course, it was earlier than that date, because many of the abbreviations, which look like acronyms or siglas, they are called in the manuscript. They're the logos. They are basically abbreviating in the same way as we find on the Coligny calendar, older, even older than Old Irish, older Goidelic words, which give an indication. And as we were studying this, Joseph Menard didn't, because in those days we wanted to check out a lot of the mythological and cosmological input that we were getting from the different Irish and Welsh and Breton in France, Brittany. Breton cultural indicators, or the database, which could give us more on the, let's say, the vocabulary or the terminology surrounding star lore and astronomy and things like that. And while looking through the Book of Balamote, I discovered or found that many of the symbols, they resembled very closely some of the astrological symbols that we find in classical astrology, but different, very different. They seem to be more archaic, as is often the case with Celtic culture. It's often more archaic than some of the classical things, or some of the Vedic things even, and that's something people really don't know much about. Many will think that Sanskrit is the oldest of the Indo-European languages, and it's older than any of them. But Old Celtic is a lot more archaic than Sanskrit and Persian, and because why? Because the Kentum Indo-European languages are more archaic, less evolved than the Satem languages, and we say Kentum and Satem because this is the way they pronounced 100 in these languages. And the K sound becomes the Sush sound, as it evolves in the Indo-European speeches. So all this to say that we were looking at these symbols, and then we found out that many of them were referring to calendar things, pertaining to calendar things, especially in some of the siglas where there was an indication on one of the symbols where it was written Yule, which Yule in Gaelic we know it means July. It's borrowing from Julius Caesar's name, July, the month of Julius. And so there you are. That gave us a first indication that what we were looking at, these were symbols depicting either months or constellations or for the zodiac. And then we looked in further, and as I was going through some of them, I asked Joseph Menard, what's this thing about Tich? And there was another one where it was written Ri, R-I-I, and then Fi, F-I-I, and things like that. And then Te, and then Goa. And Mr. Menard said, holy jeez, these are planetary names. Tektos in Old Celtic means messenger, wanderer. And that's exactly what Jupiter was, he was a wandering star, before being a god. And, or became a star after was ephemerized into, local body of some kind in the sky. The Vedic astrology calls it lokas, and Celtic had another name. She was Sidos in Old Celtic, which meant place of peace or seat or residence. So it was a residence of a god. And then we had Gaw, and what does that mean? Kidios was one of the Gaelic gods for Mars. There you are. Kokos means red. And there you have it, the red one. And as I had mentioned before, Ri was Rhea, Venus. So that, and also the name for Saturn was exactly the same that was given by the Roman commentaries concerning, as I said, Nocturnos Rusiros, and it was abbreviated as Nuh-Wi. This was finally the first indication that of course, the Gaelic Irish names, the older names, the old Celtic names, were conserved or preserved in this this document, and there was more, evidently. And so this was one of our first breaks into the finding of ancient, early Old Irish, Gaelic, Old Celtic astrology. And so I dug in deeper, and Menard and I spent about 20 years digging into these things, and finally I got it was hard to get the books published. We figured, we were going to write one in English and then write one in French to make sure that we got the right public. And so we got the one in French published. It took some time, just before Joseph Menard died. Of course, I did the writing, he helped me with it. And he had written other books, one concerning the nomenclature for all of the astronomy and astrology aspect of Celtic cultures. He went through all of the folklore surrounding stars and the skies and all these things, and all of the Celtic cultures, and came up with his dictionary nomenclature of astronyms. And so these this list that Menard had put out, I sent a copy to Peter Beresford Ellis, and he was very surprised. He says, "Where did you get this?" I says, how could you stumble on this, or where does it come from?" I says, "Well, this is what Joseph Menard had found in his study." I didn't get to hear much about that later, because I know that David Frawley, one of our early contributors, because David Frawley had mentioned these things to Peter Beresford Ellis, because he had met him in England, and so that's basically one side of it. And so we got David Frawley to help us with the Indo-European data that we had picked up from the Celtic side, because it was very difficult to understand. It was very different from the classical astrology that we knew, and it was more archaic, as I was saying before. And so we had to piece these things together. So with the help of David Frawley, who was a Vedic scholar and recognized in India for that, he got a prize from the Prime Minister of India. He's quite the pundit, and he helped us with some of the stuff, especially with in the Book of Balamot and in the Oghams, there are these grid patterns that keep coming. And we suspected that this had, when we find these same things in rock art in Europe and things like that, in very old stuff, And we discovered that it was a sun grid, the depiction of a sun grid. And the sun grid, as you know, it's the progression of the sun's path, and it's always in four parts because of the four stations of the sun, the equinoxes, and the solstices, and this is why the zodiac, the belt, the zodiacal belt, the ecliptic, it couldn't be divided into more than multiples of 4 because of the sun's progression during the year, the way to measure it. And so later on in another video, I'll get into deeper into how Indo-European astrology developed into Vedic astrology and classical astrology, and other offshoots like the one we found in Persia or the one we found in Gaul, as with the Coligny calendar. So as models, for devising calendars and zodiacs. So that's about it for now. So if you want to know more before we get to another talk, you can always purchase the book here at McFarlane Books, and it's got a whole bunch of illustrations and tables and footnotes that you can consult. And if you're an astrologer, then you'll be able to decode much of this, and there are tables and as I said, and different schemes for the houses, and for forecasts, and for themes, for birth themes and things like that. So by using this, you can really get deeper into Celtic astrology, something that the modern neo-druidical tree alphabet calendar will not give you. So make sure you get this if you want to follow me up on the next videos and conferences or discussions, Druid Talks. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Thank you very much. See you next time.